So Jerven, many of you probably know him. When it was about large data sets, I always pointed to him. Now Hannah does a really good job in that as well, but Jerven was for a very long time probably the only one which really scaled SPARQL, at least publicly, on really large dimensions. He knows a thing or two about that, and every time I was sad about SPARQL, I talked to Jerven, and afterwards was super motivated and happy. So happy to see what you have for us today.
Okay. So thank you for all being here. I'm going to talk about SPARQL when you can't control the clients, and also a bit about why we use it. So to start with, I would like to talk, not just because I'm here, it's also because I have a great team that helps. And SwissProt is a database that's been running for a long, long time. And it's nice to have data, but it's really nice to have quality data. And SwissProt definitely is that. So in biology, everything is connected. You have DNA, RNA, proteins, reactions, metabolites. It all acts together, and it's nothing that doesn't interact with something else. DNA, that's the genes. They encode RNA, which can be sometimes like work orders, and that those make the proteins. And proteins are the majority actors of making things alive. And they react and they work with chemicals. And that's why they're so interesting. So, of course, unfortunately, things don't always go well. And disease acts on all of these levels. And we're here at Roche because medicine helps with diseases. It's all connected. So my group, the SwissProt group, works on only a few parts of this. We don't have the resources or the capabilities or even the knowledge on how to work on everything in the world. You have to have your focus. So we work on UniProt, Rhea, and SwissLipids, and some other databases which will not come today. HAMAP is a bit interesting, and you could almost see it as a database of SPARQL rules. So SPARQL construct queries, 2,500 of them, to generate data in UniProt. Rhea is reactions, chemically balanced at pH 7.3, and SwissLipids, you might think you don't want to have fat in your body, but really you need it. So SwissLipids is a database of all the different kinds of lipids and how they relate to other things. So when we do research, our viewpoint changes, and we never really look at the data the same way. And every time our users come to us, they will come with unique viewpoints, and you never know what you want. And it's always going to be a research question. So the infrastructure we deploy has to really be about connections and enable viewpoints. And the data storage that we have must also enable this. So we end up with graphs quite naturally. And I also want to talk a little bit about these FAIR principles. You might have heard them a lot over the last few days. But the first one, findable one, is we must identify everything. So you need to have a data format that has identifiers at its heart. And we really don't do that in the field. I don't think we do it in any field. And we often have identifiers which are very similar to our house in the middle of the street, and that works for a while, and then the street changes, and the middle is no longer the same. This is true for everything. We have data records, and it'll be like the third line, or cell C17, and at some point, these identifiers no longer hold. So we need to deal with this. How can we deal with our information on the long term? So in RDF, you even have a name for these things. They're called blank nodes, and we don't like them. To be honest, in most other technologies, everything is a blank node because they have no global identity. You always get the identity from context. So we try to say, make your identifiers as stable as possible. It's the world, things change, you can never make things permanent. I personally like them as readable as possible, as small as possible, but also have as much context in them as possible. But above all, there needs to be IRIs. And this IRI business seems a bit strange for many people. Identifiers are just numbers. But only when you want to have connections across many, many data sets, well, then you have to have global identifiers. and we only have one widely accepted global identifier standard, and that's IRIs. So, UniProt is a collection. It's a collection of proteins, and proteins can give very nice images because they give nice life. But collections are only usable if you can actually access them. And they're only usable if they're well curated and very well organized. And we've talked earlier about business models for running SPARQL endpoints. And I must say, UniProt doesn't have a business model for running a SPARQL endpoint. But that's much like museums don't have a business model for running a museums. We just think they're good ideas, and we hope that the community will fund them. And luckily enough, UniProt has been funded for many years, and we hope that continues. The nice thing about having a good collection of very nicely curated data is that they are honey for the AI bees, because AlphaFold needs UniProt. All this new AI work needs well-organized data. You might say garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't start with the garbage, you might get something nice out. And we need real interoperability. Interoperability that isn't just a slide, but is actually something that people can use. And in biology, people are expected to do hard work to get the data. I mean, they're quite happy to sit in the lab, work with a poisonous spider and inject radioactive material into it and hope that nobody dies. Right? And most of the years that goes well, and a few years ago it might have gone wrong, and then we all had to spend a few months at home. So, difficult data is common in the life sciences. And that's why people aren't too unhappy when they say, well, your data compliance, we have two standards, and in between, something needs to happen. And this is really what happens in our field. We have many standards, and everybody says we're standards compliant, but the connection somehow seems to be a very hairy-bally ETL pipeline that was, done by the minimal budget in the time that was required, and don't touch it because, it will kill people. So the standards numbers here are correct. These are Australian and US plugs. And the conversion, we all think is trivial. Make an ETL type pipeline. It's just another script, right? It's not hard. We've done this. I had a course on it in university. How much trouble could it possibly be? And then you get into a large enterprise like Roche or anybody else, and you talk about this, and it's like, well, we have 10 databases per employee. Well, that's a lot of ETL pipelines that got, around. So they are there. They're, in the end, actually quite a high risk and a source of waste, because we shouldn't need to write an ETL pipeline just to get some more data. And lots of people talk about graphs as being the solution. They're definitely part of the solution. But many graphs are just not connected, because they don't really look at the world in a way where you say, well, things should be connected. So we end up with a world where a solution would be one semantic graph. And that's only because it allows connections between data sets that were not envisaged by the data creators many years after they were done. So the current economic reality is that the only thing that actually even gets close to this is SPARQL and RDF. Many of the other standards, they don't even think about these kind of concepts. They're not even there. So they might be easier to use, they might be performant, but they leave us on our little islands, and we really need to get onto a global world where things are connected. So that's why I put SPARQL in production. And since the times that I wrote this slide, UniProt has grown with yet another 10 billion triples. So I just released it this morning, the latest release. It's now 160 billion. So to think about that, what's that size on disk for Virtuoso that we use? It's about 10 terabytes, which means it's not that large. It's annoying, but it's not that large. It's not petabytes. It's not something that a large organization couldn't easily afford to do. Another very nice data set that we provide is SPARQL is Rhea, so these reactions. It's only 200 megabytes. You know, that fits on your phone, easy. Swiss-Lipids is a bit big because we stuffed the pictures in, so that's chemicals, and chemicals have visual representations. Well, just put it into the triple store, makes the triple store a bit bigger, but you know, nothing usable. And HAMAP, it's tiny because it's rule-based. It's a database of rules. But the nice thing is that we're not alone. And this is important because every technology has network effects. And we have friends inside our own organization. And this is a little bit which is strange about the Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics. We're not just one team or one consortium. We have different groups in different places. It's very Swiss, it's federalized, it's decentralized. So we always had firewalls in between our organizations. So SPARQL allows us to connect our data in many new ways. And we have friends outside of our institute, all over the world. And if you've never looked at UMI data for the life sciences, it's a really nice collection of databases, but it also is actually a fair metric because it shows you how good is your data, and it tries to do some measurements about it. So this is the right kind of audience. I'm going to go a bit more in depth. So you might have questions that we get from our scientists or from the world. And there will always be new questions, because if it was a question that somebody else already asked, it wouldn't be research, right? So one would be find the genes encoding enzymes that catalyze reactions for which those metabolites, and figure out the drugs acting on these metabolites. So you're starting connecting things. So UniProt has really well done curation, and this is for human. So UniProt links to diseases. So we say this protein is something that's a disease. And the colors match the original things. So that's highlighting going. So we go from disease is one point, but we also need to know that these proteins are not just disease related, is that they are enzymes. So we collect our relations to Rhea. We're still in one database, that's quite nice. Oh, but now we need the metabolites. This is something that UniProt doesn't have. So we really need to ask Rhea, well, we used you, can you also give me the metabolites behind it? Well, Rhea uses KGF, which is an ontology of chemicals, and it gives us the metabolites. This is already something that UniProt can no longer provide. We already have to ask another database, Rhea. Oh, we need the genes. UniProt has that. We have cross-references to genes, so we imported that, we make those, and we maintain those. However, drugs is really outside of our competence center. Drugs have really lots of uses, but it's not something that we work with in our databases. It's not even something that we work very much with in the Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics. So we need to go and grab another database. It's called Campbell. It's a friend of KGF, but quite different. This is a public database of lots of different drugs and things that could have been drugs that have been tested, where the data has been released in public. They have cross-references, and we use them. And there's a public data dump of them that this gets an RDF, and IDSM, the check node of the Elixir, provides this data in their SPARQL endpoint and has many more really cool capabilities. We combine all of those, and we have one large query. But we did answer a research question, and we connected 3 resources on demand, where nobody ever sat down and gave UniProt money to connect to Campbell. So we never thought this would be useful, or we thought it would be useful, but we didn't think it would be affordable to ever build. So here with the SPARQL query, we actually can do this. And if you wait a bit, it's not as fast as we would like, but it does work, you get it. And you have this combination of the protein, the disease, the reaction, the metabolite, the medication, and at the DNA level, the gene, all connected. And there was nobody who told you, you can't do this. These SPARQL endpoints were public because these teams were funded by the public to make their data public. so that the researchers who are trying to make our lives better for tomorrow, or to be honest, just get a Nature publication, can do what you want to do. And that is, do really interested research. This kind of capability wasn't possible a decade ago. I mean, SPARQL has improved in capabilities, but also in the network. UniProt is no longer alone. We have many friends, and therefore we have network effects and things are accelerating. So, gene, protein, disease, reaction, metabolite, drugs, connected, and hopefully patented next week. So, talking a little bit about our setup. So, internet is big and outside. We have a firewall in front. We still do very simple Apache load balancing and logging and making sure that things are done. However, we have some custom middleware. For my team at SIB, we use two different SPARQL endpoint engines, Virtuoso open source and RDF4j native. For open source, Virtuoso is only for UniProt because UniProt is annoyingly large. The hardware behind it is we have a double, it's about 15,000 per node. These are new nodes. The previous nodes were 10 years old and were about the same price. So these are 768 gigabytes of RAM, so 3/4 of a terabyte, and 32 core machines, and a relatively number of NVMe's. This is something you must say for your enterprises and for other research teams. You can pay this. This is the amount of money that you pay for a good microscope in the lab. It's really not exactly insensitive or impossible. So, why do we do this custom middleware? Why don't we just put our Virtuoso up in the world like many people do? Well, unfortunately, Cloud and Friends come around, and it's not just them, it's all kinds of bots, and you never really know when they're going to arrive. They crawl all over the data sets, and they are not very well programmed, to be honest, and they're not very polite. So, UniProt is large, it's all over the world, and we use Perl identifiers. And we also use Perl identifiers for things, perl.uniprot.org identifiers, for things that don't have an RDF representation somewhere else. So Claude gets it and goes and crawls it, and these will be translated into describe queries, and you will query UniProt at a rate of a good 80,000 queries an hour, and you will continue doing that, and then it's not just Claude, it's also Bingbot and ChatGPT and all their friends, so multiply 7. So we just found out that they all found UniProt's SPARQL endpoint about the same time. So our bot queries went from, or actually describe queries went from about 500 described queries a day to about 7 million. So, that happens. And it's not the first time that something like this has happened to us. So the middleware is there to, interact with the bots in certain ways. Another thing is that people like to figure out the statistics or rediscover a schema. And this is something that, the SPARQL engines is a weakness. We don't have good information schemas. And they come in and they count. Please give me how many predicates you have, how many types you have, how many distinct IRIs you have. If you take all the IRIs in the UniProt dataset, that will be about, just as a big CSV table, one column, it'll be about 14 terabytes right now. And if you use GNU sort, that takes about 4 days to sort to get a unique count. So Virtuoso is a lot better than that, but it's still too slow. So we know this, we've counted this for you, so we rewrite queries like this. It's not the only kind of things we rewrite queries. Sometimes we make typos in our schema. We want to change a predicate. Well, people wrote queries against our typo. We don't want to break the previous written queries. We want to rewrite them and fix it. So that's why we have this middleware. And I really want to say the bots have no pity. And their owners are really not considerate. You don't even really read internet standards. You just assume that things don't work. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm open for lots of questions.
Maybe it's a little bit of a pop question, but after your presentation, the presentation of Hannah, will we see UniProt running on Clever once they have updates?
There's a few features I need, and I think Hannah knows most of them. But it's been tested out, and it might reduce the hardware requirements on my side, so I'll be quite happy with that. That's the nice thing as well, right? With standards, you have multiple vendors, multiple implementers, and I know that we use Virtuoso at the moment in-house, but I know that other people use many of the other standards, other implementations in-house with their copies. I mean, we have a relationship with Neptune, and Oracle is actually not that bad, as long as you don't pay the bills. And you know, that's the nice thing about standards for us. There were many people who were asking, could we have a relational database dump? And it's like, oh yeah, we have one, but you know, you need Oracle 9i, that specific version because of reasons. And then it's just like, here's an RDF dump, pick your vendor, pick your poison, and everybody, you know, is happier. And it really has changed. We used to get regular weekly emails on our help desk, like, could we have a relational database dump? And those have gone already for 10 years. They just don't exist anymore. And it's not that our REST services got better. It's really the people who want the data copy, they are quite likely to pick up RDF. Not all of them, there's always people who do other things, but it is quite a nice cost reduction for the UniProt team to be able to offer that. Yeah.
That was a super nice presentation, thank you. And great advertisement for SPARQL and RDF. So you showed these different data sets, UniProt, Rhea, and so on, and you do these queries via service?
Yeah.
And the others except UniProt are really small. Why don't you put them just all together?
Because they're not ours. Okay, Rhea, I could put in. Rhea is ours. But Campbell isn't. And at some point, you always have yet one more database that you need to put in your data warehouse. And then you end up with all the issues of data freshness. And so currently, I'm dealing with 160 billion triples. Campbell is not that small. I mean, it's also about 20 billion. So you add another 20 billion. And then it's like, well, I actually want all of ENA as well. And then you add another half a trillion. And then on it goes. At some point, a single centralized system can't hold all the information in the world. You have to go decentralized. There's also organizations which have really interesting data, but we're just in a completely other field. Like, for example, the European Patent Office. UniProt is about proteins. Proteins happen to occur in patents. And it'd be nice to be able to query something like, give me of this last list all the drugs and all the proteins where there was a patent which has expired in the last 3 months. You know, pharma, you can do this, but we don't have the patent data. And if we talk to UniProt, which is like, oh, very big in the life sciences, and you go to EPO, the European Patent Organization, it's like, who the hell are you? And we don't want to combine your data, you know, go off. And with the federated SPARQL query, we can actually answer these kind of questions without doing this upfront data integration. And as a bit more time, so as an anecdote, like my first project after university was doing a data integration pipeline to be able to answer a question. And I spent 6 months on making ETL pipelines to finally figure out that actually, no, the data can't answer this question. Now with services, I figure out first of like, could the data potentially answer the question? And if there's a performance issue, we integrate. And if it's only a one-off, we don't.
Thank you. Quick follow-up, but the data sets, the ones you showed, they are all public. It's not only that the endpoints are public, but you could also download the data sets as RDF.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, these ones, yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Very impressive numbers. I'm just wondering, so looking at those numbers, change is a topic. So I'm just wondering about updates, whether, for example, they are incrementally arriving and then you, for example, just purge the prior data, or I know there are SPARQL updates running up to update a data set. So change management and potential versioning. We have seen with other projects, this might be quite relevant. So the operational aspects given the size of UniProt. Thank you.
So UniProt has a release cycle which is roughly bi-monthly at the moment. So every 2 months there comes a new release. We keep all the releases. All the releases for the RDF are available on AWS Open Data. We tend to start bulk loading from scratch, so a completely empty database and then restart from everything. And then at the end, fiddle with it if necessary, preferably not, with a few last SPARQL update queries just to get some data things. Some of the data is also expanded, like RDFS subclass hierarchies, either at load or prior to load. So yeah, we do a little bit of things, but otherwise it's as you can get it from our FTP, HTTP static file directories. Yeah.
Great, then one question from me. What's the current query stats you have, like minus maybe the describes? Do you have an idea?
Oh, I really wouldn't give you like numbers of queries because they change very much. It depends on the skill of the person implementing the queries on the other side. So for example, currently we had like 175 million queries by one program or one person just to get some data out that you could also have done in 3 queries or just 1 query. But you know, it's different skill levels. So that changes a lot per day. And also many of the queries that we get inbound are federated queries from something else. So you have a federated query engine somewhere else, sending in query patterns. So you have that kind of thing. What you can kind of have a more interesting number is like we have about 2,000 people who regularly write SPARQL queries by hand, where the kind of, when you look at the logs, you see that these aren't, you know, one program just going, and they're not a bot, they are Chrome or maybe curl or something like this. And then you can see that the certain IP address will have hashed the query, cut something back after a few minutes, you change the query. So you can kind of say, okay, roughly 2,000 users a month. And to think about that sometimes as a, you know, like, okay, that's not so many users, 2,000, but it's 2,000 people who wrote, you know, SPARQL queries. That they wrote obviously themselves because they're not in our examples. They are about things that we don't care about, but other researchers do. And that is quite amazing. And it's significantly more than the raw data downloads from our FTP site per month. So it is a capability that some people really do use. And that's why we keep on you know, providing it and sometimes dealing with all the issues that come with it. Yeah.